Reno, welcome to the revolution. This revolution is special because it's about you. This has nothing to do about big money for us. It has nothing to do with super PACs. It's about every single one of you right here, right now, making a difference, being part of this movement. We're not going to get help by the billionaire class. We're not going to get help by the media. We're not going to get help by Wall Street. It's on us to make sure Bernie Sanders is the next president of the United States. And the only way that's going to happen is to make sure that everybody here commits themselves to caucus for Bernie Sanders on February 20th at 11 a.m. Every person in here is to commit themselves to go out and knock on their neighbor's door and let them know about Bernie Sanders and the way the United States needs him as president. Every person here needs to commit themselves to do a phone banking shift. Call their neighbors, call everybody in Nevada, make sure they know that need a caucus for Bernie Sanders on February 20th at 11 a.m. To make sure that happens, come to our office. The Reno office is at 1155 West 4th Street. Me, I'm Anthony Garcia, the Regional Field Director. I have a great staff of field organizers waiting anxiously to meet every single one of you and to make sure that we have the strategy in place to make sure that Bernie Sanders wins the caucus, wins the presidency, and is in the White House January 17th, 2017. Now I would like to introduce one of the members of this political movement, Kathleen from the Nurses Union.
Hi everybody, how are we doing tonight? As he said, my name is Kathleen and I'm a registered nurse here in Reno, Nevada. It's so exciting to be here with all of you, and this is a huge crowd. You guys should give yourself a round of applause. On behalf of the thousands of Nevada nurses National Nurses United represents, I am proud to share a stage with Senator Bernie Sanders. National Nurses United has endorsed Senator Bernie Sanders for president of all the people of the United States. Now, why did we, the nurses, choose to endorse Bernie? Because he is caring and he is compassionate. Because he believes in community. We as nurses know how fragile human life can be, and we know what it takes to save a life. But we cannot do our work on our own. We need allies, and that's why we need Bernie Sanders for president. Bernie cares. We know that as president, Bernie will fight every day, as he has fought in the past, to protect our patients. Senator Sanders, the nurses will stand by you as you have stood by us to fight together for Medicare for all. To guarantee health care to all who live in the United States of America. To eradicate poverty, to create good, paying, sustainable jobs, and for an environment that doesn't harm future generations. I couldn't be more honored to share the same stage with you, Senator Sanders, and I'm here to let you know the nurses of America love you. Because the issues you advocate for are the issues nurses hold dear. Thank you, everybody. Get ready to feel the burn.
Thank you, Kathleen. The Nurses Union is a great ally in this political revolution. And I'd like to introduce another ally, Teresa Navarro.
Thank you very much, and welcome everybody here today. It's a great honor for me to be up here. I've been an activist in this community for over 40 years and involved in Nevada for many, many years. I believe that Bernie Sanders speaks from his heart directly to the people in Nevada and all over the United States. He's been involved in politics. As an activist, I do a lot of protesting, and last year I was protesting in Washington, D.C., and happened to notice that Bernie Sanders was walking right next to me for the $15 wage. Believes in our children's education, jobs for our unemployed, and the flaws within our immigration and criminal justice system. Senator Bernie really cares, and I believe he can make the changes needed for the 99% to prosper and succeed in this country. Please, if you care about education, economics, environment, and the criminal justice system and immigration, feel the burn. Volunteer, commit your caucus card to Bernie Sanders, get involved, volunteer for the Sanders campaign, text Bernie Sanders at 82623, because we need Bernie Sanders in our White House. Thank you. So now, it is my honor and pleasure to introduce to you Senator Bernie Sanders.
Introductions. Are you all ready to make a revolution? You've come to the right place. You know, when we began this campaign, it's 8 months now. We began this campaign 8 months ago. A lot of the media was saying, well, you know, it's a fringe candidacy. You know, Sanders combs his hair very nicely, he's an interesting guy. But it's not a serious campaign. And when we began this campaign, we had no money, we had no political organization, and outside of Vermont and New England, frankly, I was not very, very well known. But a few things have happened in the last 8 months. What has happened is the American people have reached, in many ways, the same conclusion that I have, is that in these very serious times, it is too late for establishment politics and establishment economics, that in fact, we need a political revolution which shakes up the entire system. So in 8 months, what's happened is that in the early states, in New Hampshire, it appears that we may be a little bit in the lead. In Iowa, we're closing the gap. And with your support, we're going to win here in Nevada. And we're doing better in South Carolina. So I think if we do as well as I think we can do in the first 4 states, I think we have a path toward victory, not only to win this election, but most importantly, to transform our country. When we talk about this campaign, one of the interesting parts about it so far has been that when we began, a lot of the experts were saying, well, if you're going to run in this day and age a serious, well-funded national campaign, which needs tens of millions of dollars, you need and you must have a super PAC. Well, given the fact that we don't represent the billionaire class, Sheldon Adelson has not invited me to speak with him. We don't represent corporate America. We said, you know what? We're going to do this without a super PAC, without the billionaires, and without the millionaires. So what we did is simply reach out to people all across this country, working people, middle-class people, and we said, look, we are prepared to take on the big money interests. We're prepared to transform America. We're prepared to engage in a political revolution. We need your help. And you know what happened? And this is really unbelievable and something that I could not have predicted 8 months ago. As of today, our campaign has received 2.3 million individual contributions. And those contributions came from almost 1 million Americans. And it turns out that these are more individual contributions that have ever been made in the history of the United States of America. And what is extremely gratifying is that, no, we don't go to big mansions and raise huge sums, millions of dollars on a given night. The average contribution is less than $30. Campaign is running a people's campaign, a campaign that has hundreds of thousands of volunteers in 50 states in this country, including many thousand here in Nevada. And it is a campaign which uniquely says to the American people that no president, not Bernie Sanders or anybody else, can do it alone. And the reason for that, let me tell you the truth, as a United States Senator. The reason for that is that corporate America, Wall Street, the corporate media, the large campaign donors are so powerful that no president, no matter how well-intentioned, can do it alone. That the only way we make government work for all of us is when millions and millions of people, young people, people who have given up on the political process, when people begin to stand up and say that in this great country, our government must represent all of us and not just a handful of billionaires. And what the political revolution is about is not just asking for your help to win here in Nevada or win the Democratic nomination. I'm asking of you more than that. I'm asking of you to transform American politics in the sense of reaching out and getting people involved in a way that we have not been involved in a very long time. Right-wing Republicans win elections when people don't vote, when they turn off the politics. Progressives win when there is a large voter turnout and when people know what's going on. Our job is to have that voter turnout and raise public consciousness on the most important issues facing this country. Another aspect about a political revolution, also pretty hard, is to urge each and every one of you and all Americans to, in their own hearts and in their own minds, determine what the most important issues are and where we go from here. Don't look at the TV set for that information, not the front pages of the paper. We as a people have got to determine what the issues are. Just a few hours ago, literally just a few hours ago here in Reno, a woman came up to me, I guess in her early 30s, has a child, single mom, child who's 5 years of age. And she said, Bernie, I am trying to make it on $10.45 an hour, taking care of my 5-year-old, and by the way, paying off my student debt. And I am worried about whether I can do that, and I'm worried about my kids' future. That's a story being heard all over this country, just in different ways. It's the mom and the dad who are going to work, but can't find affordable childcare. It's the working class kid who has studied his brains out to try to go to college, but can't afford to do it. It's the 60-year-old worker who goes to work and is told by the boss, thanks for your 30 years of work. We don't need you anymore. We're going to replace you with somebody half your age and half your wages. It's the young person who has gone to college, studied hard, but can't find a job commensurate with his or her education. It's the person approaching 65 and is one of the 50% of Americans between 55 and 65 who does not have a nickel in the bank saved for retirement and is scared to death. About the fellow I saw a few weeks ago who is in high tech, and his job, one of his last jobs, was to train somebody in another country to do the work that he and his fellow employees were doing in the United States. It's about an 85-year-old woman, maybe in Vermont, maybe in Reno, who was figuring out how she could make it in the wintertime on $13,000 a year Social Security when she can't afford her medicine, can't afford to heat a home, and can't afford to buy the food that she needs. The bottom line is of all that, and we're going to get into these issues in more depth, is that you are living in the wealthiest country in the history of the world. But very few people understand that because almost all of the new income and wealth being created is going to the top 1%. So when we talk about the major issues facing our country, let me start off with the issue of income and wealth inequality, which to my mind is one of the great moral, economic, and political issues that we face. Today in America, I want you to hear this, the top 1/10 of 1%, not 1%, the top 1/10 of 1% owns almost as much wealth as the bottom 90%. Today in America, 20 people, the 20 wealthiest Americans, own more wealth than the bottom 50% of the American people. Today in America, one family, the Walton family of Walmart, they own more wealth than the bottom 40%. One family. Today in America, in the last 2 years, 15 wealthiest people, 15 people, have seen their wealth increase by $170 billion. Increase. That increase is more wealth than is owned by the bottom 130 million Americans. In other words, while people in Nevada, people in Vermont, and people all over this country are working incredibly long hours, 2 jobs, sometimes 3 jobs, our people work the longest hours of any people in an industrialized country. Work incredibly long hours. 58% of all new income generated goes to the top 1%. Bottom line is, we are living in a rigged economy. The rich get richer, everybody else gets poorer, and together we're going to change that. Country, it sounds like a very radical idea, but we are going to create an economy that works for working families and the middle class, not just the very wealthy. And our message to the billionaire class is very simple and straightforward. And that is that in this great country, you cannot and will not have it all. You are not going to get huge tax breaks when children in America go hungry. You are not going to cut the wages and health care and pensions of American workers and then give huge compensation packages to the CEOs of large corporations. You are not going to shut down plants in America and move to China and throw American workers out on the street. Not going to happen. When we talk about the American economy, it's not just the grotesque level of income and wealth inequality. The truth is that today, real unemployment, as opposed to official unemployment, real unemployment is not 5%, it is close to 10%, and youth unemployment is far, far higher than that. I asked some economists a few months ago to do a study for me, and I asked them to tell me what real unemployment and underemployment is for young people in this country. Kids 17 to 20 who, by the way, graduated high school, didn't drop out. This is what they said. If the kids were white, real unemployment and underemployment was 33%. If they were Latino, 36%. If they were African American, 51%. So you've got a whole generation of kids, graduated high school, trying to get their feet on the ground, trying to become adults, trying to leave their homes, trying to earn some money, become independent human beings, and they're looking and looking. There are no jobs for them. Now, if anybody in this very large room thinks that there is not a direct connection between these horrendously high rates of youth unemployment and the fact that we have more people in jail than any other country on earth, you would be mistaken. We have today some 5.5 million young people from Vermont to Nevada hanging out on street corners without much to do. So here is my first promise to you, that as President of the United States, I will invest in jobs and education for our kids, not more jails and incarceration. Another promise, that at the end of my first term, we will not have the dubious distinction of having more people in jail than any other country on earth. Not only will we address the very serious problems of institutional racism, we are going to reform a very, very broken criminal justice system. It goes without saying that people who are dangerous, people who will kill or rape or hurt, we want them behind bars. But I do not want to see millions of lives ruined for nonviolent crimes. And that is why, among many other aspects of criminal justice reform, we've got to take a very hard look at the so-called war on drugs. Right now, the Federal Controlled Substance Act, if you can believe this, and it's true, lists marijuana at the same Schedule 1 as heroin. Heroin, marijuana. Now, one can argue about the pluses and minuses of marijuana, but marijuana ain't heroin. I have introduced legislation and will fight to make happen as president, getting marijuana out of the Federal Controlled Substance Act. And the reason, and very sincerely, I think you're going to laugh, but I'm not advocating marijuana, I'm not advocating against marijuana, but it should not be a federal crime, and I'll tell you why. And I didn't know this until fairly recently, but over the last many decades, millions of people have been arrested for possessing marijuana. Millions of people. Most of those people do not go to jail for possession, but what does happen is they get a criminal record. And on top of that, there is a lot of racial injustice involved in this whole thing as well. Because it turns out, just turns out, blacks and whites, it appears, use marijuana at about the same rates. But 4 times as many blacks get arrested for possession as do whites. So what ends up happening, you've got millions of people, disproportionately minority, black, Latino, who end up with criminal records. And they go out for a job and a job interview, and the guy says, "Oh, have you ever been arrested?" "Yeah, I have been." "Okay, thanks. Have a nice day. We got somebody else to look at." A lot of lives have been ruined. So I think we got to get our act together and decriminalize, at least at the federal level, possession of marijuana so that lives do not continue to be ruined. Talk about the economy of what's going on in our country, there is a reality that I think every American knows to be true, especially people who are working 50 or 60 hours a week trying to take care of their families. And that is the simple truth, that wages in America are just too damn low. That's it. Not very complicated. Federal minimum wage is $7.25 an hour. My friends, that is a starvation wage. And our job together is to do what the overwhelming majority of Americans want. And that is to raise the minimum wage to a living wage. In my view, $15 an hour over the next couple of years. It is not a radical socialistic idea to say that if somebody works 40 hours a week, that person should not be living in poverty. And when we talk about fair wages, I hope that every man in this room will stand with the women and fight for pay equity for women. Rational economic reason why women are making 79 cents on the dollar compared to men. It is old-fashioned sexism, and together we're going to change that. In Nevada, you're going to see a lot of politicians running through your beautiful state, and some of them, my Republican friends, are going to be talking about family values. You already know what that means, I know. And what my Republican colleagues mean by family values is really quite incredible. They believe, credible to me, they believe that no woman in Nevada or the United States of America should be able to control her own body. I disagree. Quite hypocritical. Here you have Republicans saying they hate the government, they want the government out of our lives, they want to cut Social Security and Medicare and Medicaid, hate the government. But when it comes to perhaps the most personal and intimate decision that a woman has to make, they want the government right there. And in addition, when Republicans talk about family values, they want to cut the funding for Planned Parenthood. Well, I think Planned Parenthood does a great job in providing health services to women. I think we should expand funding for Planned Parenthood. And when Republicans talk about family values, they also are telling us that our gay brothers and sisters should not have the right to get married. I disagree. My wife, Jane, and I have been married for 27 years. We have 4 kids and 7 beautiful grandchildren. And we believe in family values, and we believe in strengthening families. But when I talk about family values, what I talk about is ending the international embarrassment of the United States of America being the only major country on earth that does not guarantee paid family and medical leave. Today in Nevada, today in Vermont, and all over this country, women are having babies. It's a big day for the mom and dad, and a pretty big day for the baby as well. But here's the story, and the part of that is not so funny. And that is, if that mom is a working class mother, or a low-income mother, and she gives birth today, it is likely that in 1 week or 2 weeks, she is going to have to separate herself from that baby and go back to work in order to bring in enough income to take care of the family. Separating a mother from her baby 2 weeks after that baby is born is not a family value. It is the opposite. Why I am strongly supporting legislation in the Senate and the House that will provide 12 weeks paid family and medical leave. In this country, in my view, we need to create millions of decent paying jobs. And the fastest way that I know how to do it, and what the economists are telling us, is that we need to rebuild our crumbling infrastructure, our roads, our bridges, water systems. Brothers and sisters, $1 trillion investment over a 5-year period creates 13 million decent paying jobs, makes our country more productive and safer, and that is what we have got to do. And when we talk about the need to create jobs, we can't forget about the need to prevent the loss of millions of good paid jobs because of disastrous trade policies. Our trade policy should not be about corporations throwing American workers out on the street and moving to low-wage countries. Our trade policy should be about creating decent jobs in this country and treating people around the world with respect and dignity. And when we talk about the economy, there is an elephant in the room that cannot be ignored, and that is the reality that the greed and recklessness and illegal behavior of Wall Street has done incalculable harm to the people of this country. And I know that you in Nevada are more than aware of that reality. So here is the story. In my view, the business model of Wall Street is fraud. That's it. In my view, in addition, when you have 3 out of the 4 largest financial institutions in this country who are bigger today than they were when we bailed them out because they were too big to fail, the time now is not only to reestablish Glass-Steagall legislation, it is to break them up. We need a financial system in which banks make loans to small and medium-sized businesses and help us create jobs, where they provide credit cards with reasonable interest rates. Now, it's a funny thing. In every religion in the world, Christianity, Judaism, Islam, Buddhism, whatever it is, usury is considered a sin. And yet, at a time of low interest rates, you got millions of people who pay 10, 15% interest rates on their credit cards. That's wrong. That's got to end. What this campaign is about is not only taking on the billionaire class and creating an economy that works for everybody, it is also taking on a corrupt campaign finance system. You know, what democracy is about, and I come from a small state, and every March we have town meetings and people argue about how much they're going to spend on the schools and the roads. And yet what people for hundreds of years have done in Vermont is you have town meetings and it's one person, one vote, majority rules. That's democracy. But what we have seen as a result of this disastrous 5-4 Supreme Court decision on Citizens United. You've heard about Citizens United. And that is what the Supreme Court said in an incredibly cynical way. Is they said to the wealthiest people in this country, they said, okay, you guys already own much of the economy. We are now going to give you the opportunity to buy the government. And that is what they're doing right now. You know, most people think the first caucus to be held in the election season is in Iowa. That's wrong. The first caucus was actually held many, many months ago right here in Nevada. It was called the Sheldon Adelson Caucus. And this is where we're at. One guy who's worth billions invites Republican candidates in, sits them down and says, what are you going to do for them? And if they tell him the right thing, he will provide, I don't know how many, tens or hundreds of millions of dollars into their campaigns. That is not democracy. That is called oligarchy, and we have got to change that. Here's a promise. My promise is that no Supreme Court nominee of mine will get that position unless he or she is loud and clear in saying that they will vote to overturn Citizens United. And by the way, take on the Republican cowardly politicians who are day and night working to suppress the vote. In this is my profession. I'm in politics, and I've run in many elections in Vermont. I've lost some, I've won some, but it has never ever occurred to me to figure out a way to deny people the right to vote because they might vote against me. So I tell those Republican governors and members of the legislature, you are political cowards, and if you don't have the guts to wage a free and fair election, get another job. Where we are as a country today, everybody in this room understands that for our country to do well economically now and in the future, we need to have the best educated workforce in the world. And we also understand that in a changing economy, new technology every day, education is a lifelong pursuit. Given that reality, it is beyond comprehension, that today in America, we have hundreds of thousands of bright young people who are qualified to go to college, but are unable to go to college for one reason. Their families lack the income. I have introduced legislation and will make happen as president a process in which every public college and university in America will be tuition free. The truth is, this is not a radical idea. It exists in other countries around the world. In fact, 50, 60 years ago, it used to exist in America. You go to major universities, virtually tuition free. But here's the point. In the world today, a college degree is more or less the equivalent of what a high school degree was 50 years ago. And we have got to understand that. We've got to understand that if people are going to make it into the middle class, they deserve that education as a right. And furthermore, if there are young people who don't want to go to college, want to be plumbers, or they want to be carpenters, or sheet metal workers, they also deserve the right to get the education. Just about 2 hours ago, I was at a meeting with some seniors, and a guy raised his hand and he said, you know, Bernie, let's talk a little bit about student debt. This guy, unbelievable, he is going to be 65 shortly, going to get on Social Security. But he is still paying off, after 25 years, his student debt. I have talked to mothers who are paying off their kids' student debt while they're paying off their own student debt. We got millions of people in this country who are burdened very heavily with student debt. We're paying 20–25% of their limited incomes on that debt. Can't afford to buy a car, can't afford to get married, can't afford to have kids, can't afford to own a house. That's crazy. You should not have to sacrifice your economic future for the crime of getting a college education. So what our legislation says, in addition to making public colleges and universities tuition free, it says to people who have student debt that instead of being forced to pay 6, 8, 10% interest rates, you can go out and get the lowest interest rates you can. And right now, there are people refinancing their home 2, 3, 4%, and people are paying 6, 8, 10% on college debt. That makes no sense. So people will be able to refinance, substantially reduce their total student debt. Now, making public colleges and universities tuition-free and reducing student debt is an expensive proposition, about $70 billion a year. You know how we're going to pay for it? We're going to pay for it through a tax on Wall Street speculation. When Wall Street crashed, they went to the middle class for a bailout. Now it is Wall Street's turn to help the middle class. I just came back from Vermont, took a few days off when I was back home. On Christmas Eve in Burlington, Vermont, the weather was 65 degrees. All over this world, we are seeing very freaky weather situations. And what the scientists are telling us is that the debate is over. Climate change is real. Climate change is caused by human activity. Climate change is already causing devastating problems in our country and around the world. And if we do not get our act together boldly and in a very short few years, a bad situation will become much worse, with rising sea levels, with more drought, more floods, more extreme weather disturbances, more acidification of the ocean, and around the world, as people fight for limited natural resources, more international conflict. That's what we have to look forward to. And now, in the midst of all of this, and I want to connect the dots here, we have a major political party, the Republican Party, that refuses not only to do anything significantly about climate change, but even to recognize the reality of climate change. And here's where we connect the dots. The reason for that is not that Republicans are stupid or they don't talk to scientists or they don't read literature. The reason is that if any Republican candidate for president were to stand up tomorrow and say, you know, I've talked to some scientists, I've read the literature, this climate change is a serious, serious business, we got to do something about it. On that day, the Koch brothers and the fossil fuel industry would cut their campaign funding. That's the reason. And I say to my Republican colleagues, I understand this is a tough situation, but think more about your children and your grandchildren and the planet that they will inhabit. Think about that a little bit more than your campaign contributions. Do the right thing. What this campaign is about is asking you to think very, very big, to recognize that, as I mentioned before, you're living in the wealthiest country in the history of the world, not a poor country. That not only do we have to make a political revolution, transforming American democracy, getting more people involved, raising the voter turnout, but we have to think big in other areas as well. And one area that we need to do some very fundamental thinking is the issue of healthcare. The United States of America today, as some of you know, is the only major country on earth that does not guarantee health care to every man, woman, and child as a right. And in my view, that disgrace has got to end. The Affordable Care Act has done some good things. 17 million Americans today have health insurance who otherwise would not. That's very important. We have ended the obscenity of so-called pre-existing conditions. But we have got to go further. 29 million Americans today still have no health insurance at all, and there are people in this room and millions throughout this country who are underinsured with high deductibles and high copayments. Anybody in this room have a deductible of $5,000? Yes. Okay, I see the number of hands go up. And some people have higher deductibles. What does that mean in the real world? What it means is, yeah, if you get hit by a bus, your insurance will kick in. But if you're sick today, you don't have any money in your pocket, and you got a $5,000 deductible, guess what? You're not going to the doctor when you should go. That makes no sense at all. So not only do we have 29 million without insurance, even more who are underinsured, high deductibles, high copayments, we also end up paying by far more money per capita on health care than any other major country. We are spending almost 3 times per capita what the British spend, who guarantee health care to all their people. We're spending 50% more than what the French spend, who guarantee health care for all their people. It's spending a lot more than Canadians, who guarantee health care to all of their people. And then on top of all of that, the drug companies are charging us the highest prices in the world for prescription drugs. So, if we want to guarantee health care to all people as a right, if we want to save middle-class families thousands of dollars on their health care bills, if we want to lower the cost of prescription drugs, we need a Medicare for all single-payer program. Today, in our great country, we have some 11 million people who are undocumented. And I have had the opportunity to speak to a number of them. And these are people today who are afraid, people who they and their families are living in the shadows, people who are being exploited. I remember some months ago talking to a number of young Latino kids, teenagers, and with tears in their eyes, they were talking about their fears of either they being deported or their parents being deported. In my view, in the United States of America, we cannot continue to scapegoat undocumented people. We cannot continue to allow racist discussion about Mexicans. We cannot accept for one moment this absurd idea that somehow in the middle of the night we're going to raid 11 million people and throw them out of the country. It's not going to happen, and it must never happen, and we've got to stop that discussion. The discussion we need to have is how we pass comprehensive immigration reform, how we take people out of the shadows and provide legal status, and how we move toward a path toward citizenship. When we talk about minorities, it is absolutely imperative that all of us together work to end institutional racism, to fight for real police reform, I am tired, and I think many of you are tired, of seeing on television unarmed people shot in the back or killed while in police custody. I was a mayor of Burlington, Vermont for 8 years, and I worked very closely with the police, and I believe that all over this country, the vast majority of police are decent, hardworking people trying to do the right thing in a very difficult world. But when a police officer, like any other public official, breaks the law, that officer must be held accountable. All of you are aware that we live in a very dangerous and crazy world. And you can't turn on your TV without seeing one or another acts of violence any place in the world. And we have this ISIS group, which is a barbaric organization committing terrible, terrible atrocities. In my view, it is imperative that ISIS be crushed and destroyed. But our goal is not only to be tough, and it's very easy for a politician to give a tough speech, especially when it's somebody else's kids who are going to fight the war. Not only a question of being tough, it is a question of being smart. Of being smart. What do I mean by that? This is what I mean. In 2002, when I was in the House, I listened very, very closely to what Bush and Cheney and Rumsfeld and the others were saying about the need to invade Iraq. And you listen very closely when you're in Congress, because you know that the vote you are going to cast for war or peace will mean that kids in your own state may never come back. And in my state, that's exactly what happened, big time. I listened very closely to that debate, and I ended up not believing what Bush and Cheney were saying, and I voted against the war. Go to YouTube, check out what I said on the floor. And what I said, and it gives me no pride or joy, believe me, to tell you that much of what I feared would happen did in fact happen in terms of the cost of that war and the destabilization in that region, which led, of course, to the rise of groups like ISIS. So the issue is not being tough, the issue is being smart. And to be smart, we have got to understand that the United States cannot and should not do it alone. In fact, doing it alone, sending in large numbers of ground troops into Syria or back into Iraq is exactly what ISIS wants. Because then they can talk about a war against the West and against Christianity and all that other stuff and attract disaffected Muslim young people from all over the world. So we have not got to play, we should not be playing into their hands. What should we be doing? Well, what we should be doing is putting together a very large and strong coalition. If you listen to very brave and smart people like King Abdullah of Jordan, a country which has played a very heroic role in this whole business, taken a lot of refugees in. What Abdullah says, he says, of course, terrorism is an international issue, but it is primarily a Muslim issue and a war over the soul of Islam. And according to Abdullah and others in the Muslim world, the people who have got to be on the ground are the Muslim nations themselves. I believe that the United States has a very important role, along with the UK, France, Germany, and Russia, in supporting the Muslim troops on the ground with airstrikes, with training of troops, with other ways. But we must not get involved in perpetual warfare in the Middle East. Let me just conclude by thanking you. This is just a terrific turnout here tonight. We have, and let me reiterate, I say this from the bottom of my heart, this campaign is not about me. It is about all of us. That's what it is. What that means is not only that I cannot do it alone in the White House, but we need millions of people to stand up together to transform, not just to elect the president, to transform this country. Don't tell me that the United States of America can't guarantee health care to all people. Don't tell me that in this country we cannot make public colleges and universities tuition free. Don't tell me that we cannot have the best child care and pre-K system in the world. Don't tell me that we cannot lead the world in combating climate change and transforming our energy system. We can. None of these ideas are radical. These are not pie-in-the-sky concepts. Everything that I'm talking about is doable. But it is only doable if millions of people begin to stand up and transform our political system and create a government which works for all rather than the few. Thank you.